These talks in this section are going to be about fires. We've been talking a little bit about them earlier this week, but we're going to focus on them now for these two talks. First talk is about the 2021 Jaeger Library fire, and that talk will be delivered by Nikki Crowster, who has more than 40 years of practice and expertise in leadership, governance, library systems, design thinking, and operations management, and currently occupies the role of Director of Information Systems and Resources at the University of Cape Town Libraries, where she, among many other duties, oversees the UCT Academic Archives, Rare Books, African Studies Library, and the Conservation Unit. She is the project lead for the salvage and recovery phases of the 2021 Cape Town Jaeger Library Fire Disaster Management Response. She has engaged widely on this matter on local and global platforms, and we are really looking forward to hearing from her. So, Nikki, if you want to turn on, there you are. It's all yours. Go ahead.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Nikki Crowster, and I'm the project lead for the 2021 Jaeger Fire and Recovery. I'm appreciative of the invitation to UCT to speak about the disaster we experienced. I'm sharing the story of the library and reading room fire. This story has been told many times and will continue to be done so that we in the GLAM sector strengthen our preparedness for disasters. You will see images you may be familiar with, but whose visceral impact still resonates. In the Western Cape, one finds the southernmost tip of the African continent, a place where the cold west coast Benguela and the warm east coast Agulhas Ocean currents meet. This, together with the geography of the region, gives rise to macro and microclimates, a diverse floral kingdom, and a four-season in one-day phenomenon, which is a constant subject of discussion among us Cape Townians. It's also the home of the iconic Table Mountain, added in 2012 as one of the 7 new wonders of nature. The University of Cape Town nestles on the eastern slopes of the mountain, and on the top left-hand side of the slide, one can see part of the mountain. The University of Cape Town is home to the University of Cape Town Libraries, which includes the historic Jaeger Library and Reading Room, which serves as the main library in the early 20th century. A project was undertaken about a decade ago to restore the library to its original state. It is noted that in present times, civil unrest and climate change are key drivers to disasters in the GLAM and heritage sectors. The changing climate was noted in Cape Town with a crippling drought a few years earlier, and on Sunday, 18 April 2021, unseasonally hot weather and strong swirling winds prevailed. A fire started on Table Mountain and, driven by strong winds that changed direction, caused it to move across to the University of Cape Town side, and then the unthinkable happened. This visual of the historic Jaeger Library reading room burning punches one in the gut regardless of the number of times that it plays. It is surreal, at times reminiscent of a movie, and then one realized, but this is surreal. We experienced despair and hopelessness as we viewed this firsthand, but also a determination that we would overcome. The entire building was gutted. If not for one fire door, serviced 2 weeks prior to the event, the entire 3-building Chancellor Oppenheimer complex would have burnt down. Lesson: do the maintenance regardless of circumstances. We saw to the checks of fire management despite it being COVID-19 hard lockdown. We could not foresee the embers, driven by the wind, would flare up onto the roof of the building and ignite the celluloid of the unique African film collection housed on the topmost floor. In Africa, the symbol of the elephant is a symbol of strength, power, wisdom, leadership, harmony with the environment, and links to heritage. So it is fitting to encompass therein the requirements to deal with a disaster of this magnitude. The South African Disaster Management Act No. 57 of 2002 was amended in 2015 to speak to climate change It places in context the word disaster, provides a structured response to disaster, defines actions, roles, and responsibilities, and delineates coordinated operations from various stakeholders. Models for disaster management contain the steps to prevent a disaster, though that might not always be possible, to ensure that skilled, knowledgeable persons are involved to respond to the emergency. And these would emanate from diverse sources depending on the disaster, and to be part of the restoration, recovery, and reconstruction. I find this model to be a useful tool. The 4 steps: preparation. We were not prepared for a fire to jump buildings. Response, recovery, and mitigation. Time does not allow us to go into the finest detail, but we will speak about the response phase, stage 2 of the cycle. Preparedness was reduced. The Jagger fire happened. Fire damaged the wiring, so we could not access supplies in the library. We set up an outdoor office. It must be noted that the university responded swiftly, and within 48 hours of the event, many mitigating projects were in place. A specialist disaster management company was assigned to the libraries to deal with the fire and the water damage. We had discovered 2 substrate floors of materials that had escaped being burnt out, but affected by the firefighting. It was wet, and in some cases, it was still underwater. Using various systems for salvage and retrieval, for information gathering, for managing human beings during the COVID-19 lockdown, ensuring occupational health, safety, and environmental controls, providing food and sanitation, and exploring business continuity. We navigated the response phase of the disaster management cycle through salvage, working alongside heavy-duty machinery used to make the site safe. Inside the Jagger ruin, it was scoured for materials that had miraculously escaped, such as those indicated by the red arrow. The first extraction started as soon as we got the go-ahead from the safety officer. As it was 72 hours since the event, evidence of mold was all over. Conditions in the salvage site were challenging. Air was being piped in, water was being pumped out, makeshift lighting had been installed. It was the national hard lockdown, so people had to wear face masks and maintain a physical distancing of 1.5 meters. Shifts were set up, regular water and other breaks were taken, occupational health, safety and environmental controls were enforced. The human spirit prevailed. People using tools at their disposal, including cell phone torches. This slide shows how instructions were communicated in the basements. The circled image is a snapshot of the process checks to ensure the order of the archive was retained in an orderly manner. 3-person teams were used, 1 to retrieve, 1 to put in the crate, 1 to record, and then to check each other's work. Shelves were marked, and these markings were duplicated onto the crates. As the crates left the salvage site by being passed from hand to hand, inventory checks were done. The data were captured by teams assigned to the function. Various checks and balances remained in place to assure quality control of the data. At this point, materials were triaged, the at-risk material not going into immediate treatment into the triage tent, which can be seen on the left corner of the right photograph. These materials were sprayed with an antifungal solution, tightly wrapped in cling foil or sarin wrap, and stored at -22 degrees. On day 17, the first extraction was completed. The signage of the salvage phase took place 45 days after the fire. At that time, 13,000 crates of material had been extracted from the salvage. 8,000 were put into cold storage at -22 degrees. The salvage was stored over 8 locations. We had more than 2,000 volunteers on our plaza, University Plaza. We had 2 cold storage containers, 2 drying chambers. All of this took place during the COVID-19 hard lockdown, and not one instance of COVID-19 had been reported. In the substantive recovery phase, noting that these phases of disaster management overlap, they are not linear. Our recovery phase is 3 years old and is projected at about 20 years. The gains from the disaster are due to the many role players and volunteers, staff who helped with the recovery, and they continue to play a role in the recovery. Work is ongoing. Recent statistics reporting on the recovery shows a return to the published collections of about 70,000 objects from the African Studies, the Afrikaner, the rare books, government publications, and maps collections. In the archive, we see 100 of about 1,500 collections have now been fully salvaged, and close to 70,000 objects have been digitized, a celebration and tribute to the efforts of the staff. We reduced the recovery phase by a decade by sending to Europe 1 ton of materials for mass lyophilization and gamma radiation. We expect the return of these materials in mid-2025. A conservation unit was set up, standards were created and adhered to. Equipment was bought with donor funding. And we report regularly to the donors. Conservation is now part of our operations, and we include holding workshops to grow capabilities in this area of scarce skills in South Africa and further. Around preservation, much has been said about digitization as the panacea for disaster management for archives. That is not quite correct. Challenges are documented in the literature, and we have anecdotal and now experiential evidence to support that position. Digitized content is not fully available to researchers, as we do not have the funding or the infrastructure in place to mount these for day-to-day browsing. Having said all of that, we are fully aware of the affordances of digitized material, especially primary material with cultural and heritage significance to the research mandate. A few observations. Just about a month after we started retrieving and salvaging from the site, we found the documentation on managing preservation. To date, the university has undertaken a business impact analysis. We have a business continuity plan. The recovery phase continues. We continue to learn. We continue to share what we have learned. We continue to be resilient because that is what is needed. We take constant care of the well-being of everyone involved in this activity, and we have great gratitude. Gratitude is especially important. We set up an open-air exhibition on the hoarding of the ruined Jagger Library to pay tribute to the volunteers, to the donors, and to the library staff and everyone else who was involved in these activities. It is correct that the elements on the screen interlock. Managing a disaster requires much knowledge, skills, resources, and the judicious use thereof in relation to each other. There are many information and knowledge collaterals and assets that are relating to the Jagger fire in various formats by now, including a design from the debris, salvaged the burnt pages of the books, as well as twisted metal coming from the Jagger site. Our story is ongoing. It is indeed as Churchill observed. Now, this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It is perhaps the end of the beginning. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That is just amazing how many volunteers you got for this. It's just phenomenal. And we're going to hold questions until after the next talk, and then we'll bring back both of these speakers. So if you just hang on for a little bit, thank you so much. Keep putting your questions into Slido. I should have said that before. The link is back up in the chat again to put your questions into Slido. Our next talk is going to be about the post-fire recovery at historic sites at Lahaina. And this is going to be delivered by Kimberly Flook, who is Deputy Executive Director of the Lahaina Restoration Foundation. Her experience includes work at 10 historic sites and museums over 23 years as a museum professional, including 14 years as a museum director and 9 years heading exhibition curatorial and education teams. Past sites that she's been at are in New Orleans, in New York State, and at the Lahaina Restoration Foundation, she leads the team that cares for and interprets the Restoration Foundation's collections and sites. And just a reminder to everyone that these bios are available on the site that you have the link to. And so, Kimberly, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, so I want to start with just an overview of my disaster. While disasters come in all sizes, we lost our entire town. And actually not that different to what Nikki was just talking about. It was a wildfire. Started up in the mountains. Usually the winds blow in from the sea and blow the fire up. And in this case, we had a phenomenon known as a ka'aula wind, where the winds blow down. And this was because we were between a low and a hurricane. And so basically a flamethrower came down the mountains through town, and we lost 102 lives, 2,200 buildings, over 3.4 square miles. And 900 plus of the buildings were 50 years old or older. The beauty of Lahaina is that it was and has been important in every era, from pre-contact arrival of Polynesians through the tourism era. And we had buildings and architecture and sites that represented all of those areas, and we lost pretty much all of the physical representation of those during our fire. So I have a brief film I want to show you that I'll talk about why in just a second. It's about 2 minutes long.
By the mid-1900s, decades of neglect had taken a toll on Lahaina's historic sites. Dilapidated buildings with no roofs, sagging staircases, and crumbling stone walls. And in the case of the Seamen's Hospital, a large pile of rocks lay where the building once stood.
In 1962, Lahaina Restoration Foundation started bringing the buildings back to life, creating innovative educational exhibits, developing cultural programs, and surrounding the sites with native Hawaiian plants and trees.
Soon, school children were taking tours and planting kalo. Visitors and locals were learning about all eras of Lahaina's history, and the historic sites became alive again.
For 60 wonderful years, historic Lahaina town thrives. Then on August 8, 2023, it was destroyed. All of it.
In shock and dismay, LRF sent out a call for help, and you answered with passion, with love, with commitment, and with monetary support.
Your response was and continues to be truly outstanding. We are forever grateful.
As we head down the long road to recovery, we ask you stay with us and we continue this journey together so we can bring back the community we cherish, the heritage that nourishes us, and the town that is our home.
All right, so the one reason I wanted to share that is it gives a very good overview of the sites that I'm going to talk about, but also what happened to the town in general. And then I do just want to make a point that this film, with help from local filmmakers, cost us about $2,000. And so far, using just this film, not even placed in other things, has brought us $1.5 million. Even if it had been charged at full rate, the return on that film was absolutely amazing. The reason 1.5 is a drop in the bucket. So we have been looking at the numbers, and the 13 historic sites that we lost in Lahaina, which are our responsibility, our kuleana, are going to cost us $80 million, $60 million of which will be supported by FEMA and other federal funds. So we have a huge lift. So 1.5 is amazing, but we've got a long ways to go. So I want to talk about a Hawaiian thought, which is makahana ka'ike, which is in working, one learns. And usually this is applied to doing things hands-on, like you learn by doing. What I hope here, and I think this entire conference is leading to, is that it would be great if we don't have to learn during the work, if we can learn beforehand. So I want to share some things that we learned at post-recovery or post-disaster during recovery. So one is that with relatively simple prep, you can actually be back in business pretty quickly after a disaster. You will have many responsibilities that are new, and you're not going to lose a lot of your old responsibilities. There's no such thing as downtime. You will need your wider community to succeed, and ultimate losses cannot be defined in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. In our case, the losses keep coming, unfortunately. So some of that early prep, cloud storage, in whatever form you want to do it, it can save the day. Within 24 hours of our disaster, I had complete access to all of my files through an iPad. And as soon as I bought a laptop, I had my entire desktop looking exactly like it was on the computer that I lost in my office to the fire. So remote working, having access to your files, being able to work concurrently with people who are displaced when a town's gone, everybody's not going to necessarily be able to be in the same room. I am a huge proponent of cloud storage in whatever form you can find it. Also, we ultimately have been asked by multiple people what we lost. And this is everything from the buildings that we were in charge of, the collections that were within them, but every bit of infrastructure as well. So that's everything from an historic missionary house through how many staplers were on the desks. And this is coming from insurance, this is coming from FEMA, this is coming from litigation, and this is even coming from donors. So photos, good photos, so photos that don't have flash photography, photos that are from the right angle, photos that capture details that can help with particularly analysis and putting a number to something are really important. Videos as well. I'm going quickly through this. I'm not going to read all of the numbers, but I do have the slides if anyone would like them, and I have some with even more detail. But if you take a video, take it slow, focus on everything, and open every door and drawer. That's what you want to think of there. Now for us, this was an entire town loss, and the toxicity of the town was absolutely off the charts. So we thought like we were being kept from our site. And I know that happens from, just a single room burning all the way to losing an entire town. But there really wasn't downtime. So we are on an island chain that is the farthest occupied population chain anywhere in the world. We are thousands and thousands of miles from any other basically occupied land. So we really have to depend on ourselves. So we had to plan our own recovery. We did our own training. We became the experts so that we indeed did get to enter. So we did HAZWOPER training, collections care, first aid, and CPR. We started fundraising right away, and we represented ourselves at every meeting to make sure we were at the table for major discussions about what's going to happen to the town that was lost. More importantly, we immediately reached out and had reached out to us, our community. And so we expected our professional community to reach out to us. And that included national heritage responders, the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative, museums and cultural practitioners. But what we found is that it was actually outside of our profession that we got the first access to our sites. So our HAZWOPER training came through construction companies letting us sign up with their workers. Firefighters and police saw cultural items in the ash and brought us in to recover those items within 2 weeks of the disaster. Government workers and politicians actually actively worked for us to get the training and the access that most people didn't get. So we got our access within weeks. If we had gone through the traditional kind of cultural path, we would not have gotten access until November. So we had access in early September by looking outside of our profession for support. So with that in mind, August 8th was our Lahaina wildfire disaster. By mid-August, we had access to the disaster zone, working with the tree recovery. So there's some heritage trees. So we actually got our first access by working with arborists. September 1st, our administrative staff was allowed to enter with our National Heritage responders. September 10th, artifact recovery began at the very first site. That was with a police officer. January 24th, our first site was stabilized. May 24th, we had recovered artifacts at 4 of our 5 lost museums. On the other hand, 13 months after the fire, no debris has actually been removed at the historic sites. We're 3 to 6 more months out before most debris removal will occur at our historic sites. One site has still not undergone artifact recovery due to dangerous situation, and we're 12 to 24 months before any construction will occur at our 13 sites. And once that starts, we're still looking at 8 years of work to get them back up and going. So one of the things that we learned is loss does not end with a disaster. So immediately after the fire, this is a picture of 2 sites, the Pioneer Mill Office and the Lahaina store, both of which were plantation era 19th century, about 19-teens buildings, built and designed by the same architect, a German architect, built and designed in the same style, which is concrete, which is a very unusual style for Lahaina. One of which survived to this day, Lahaina store, and one of which had to be demolished because it actually was not as sturdy as we thought when we immediately recovered. So we're still taking hits. Things that we thought survived didn't survive. The same with the Baldwin House. So the Baldwin House is an 1834 missionary home. You can see before and after pictures here. As time went on, you can see that we have fenestration failure occurring as weather and other activities and just time. We did do stabilization, but what we have found is that the stabilization is not good enough, and we are going to have to take that building down. And we found that out about 2 weeks ago. So we're still 15, 16 months after things that we thought survived actually did not survive in the style that we thought they would. So hopefully the materials can be used, but the building, which we thought was a win, was actually a loss. We lost over 34,000 collections over these 13 historic sites. And looking at some of our buildings, this is actually the old Lahaina courthouse. The steel beams melted and are like wet spaghetti noodles. So our immediate action was like, okay, we're not going to find much that isn't cast iron or stone. So luckily, Native Hawaiian stone artifacts we found in droves, cast iron plantation era artifacts as well. But we had some surprises. Dr. Baldwin's medical tools, he was a medical missionary. The Baldwin silverware, even a filigree silver card case were actually found during artifact recovery. Ceramics did very, very well as long as they did not fall. So if they burned in place, they actually held up very nicely. But if there was any level of fall that was more than a foot or two, then we lost them to breakage. And then ivory and bone actually did really, really well. So we have some mahjong tiles and counters, scrimshaw, which is a whaler's whale tooth kind of artisan design, all survived, which was absolutely amazing. But we did find that a matter of weeks makes a huge difference. So when we went in with the police officer, the first 2 sets in each of these pictures actually show you coins, Chinese coins from our Wohing Plantation era Society Hall that were recovered at that point. And since we were working with a police officer, we didn't actually have things set up as well as we like. And so we did not re-enter that site for about 3 months. And so the second set of pictures actually show what happens when metal hangs out in wet ash, which is kind of like lye. So getting access quickly using those non-professional approaches, we actually got some pieces that survived beautifully and other pieces that had deteriorated quite a bit when we had access to more normal channels. So in working, I learned paper doesn't survive, but you're going to need all those records to apply for assistance and to rebuild. So digitizing, photographing, really important. We depended heavily on photos and videos over memory, but what we actually had in place was not as good as we could have done. As we waited for access to our sites, we worked twice as many hours to meet our responsibilities. That is not sustainable. So immediately after about 1 or 2 weeks, we're like, okay, if you had a vacation, take your vacation. If you're going to a conference, take your conference. If we don't work more than 8-hour days, we actually started balancing. But those first 2 weeks, we didn't balance very well. And our first access came through our community, but not necessarily through our profession. So really look to the wider community for help. And ultimately, the end of the disaster is not necessarily the end of loss. And I feel like we still have a few more losses coming our way down the road. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Nikki, can you put your camera back on and join us back for questions? And hang on, my question page just did something funky. Okay, there we go. So thank you both. That was amazing. And I think it's interesting to note in both of these, and we've been hearing it throughout the entire week. So it's not just about disaster preparedness for your collections, but also for your networks, for making those connections to people where you end up with all these volunteers, or you end up being able to go directly to the police or the fire department, and sort of thinking about these as resources as well, not just in your collections. Okay, I'm going to start with, let's see, the first one here that's been upvoted for Nikki is, have there been alterations to the landscaping in the university or on the campus after the fire to provide barriers for future fires, to like break that windbreak? Sort of, we were heard Samantha talk about the buildings came down and the wind came up through harder. Has there been any kind of preventive measures like that?
The Table Mountain is managed by a particular authority. So there were 3 parties that were involved: the municipality, the authority that managed Table Mountain, and then, of course, the university as well. And there was much debate and discussion around blame and around cause. And some of them verged on things like, oh, you might not have closed a window. I note what you said, Kimberly, about the toxicity. There are human reactions in times like this. What has been done is that there have been clearing of the mountain, whether or not in relation to preventing fires, because this was such an unusual occurrence. We have fires often between November and February. We have what's called fire season in our area, and this was April. So it was unseasonal. The winds also changed direction, which was quite unusual at that time. So while certainly the answer is yes, of course, preventative measures were made, even basic operational things like cleaning out gutters and so on. There's no logical answer to this. The fire jumped a couple of buildings. They missed in a very important heritage building that we have alongside us. And then palm trees down in the town caught alight, and the mill about 2 kilometers away from us caught alight. So there was no logic. This was wind taking embers, and it fell where it would. So the answer is yes, certainly we prepared, but as this conversation has happened this afternoon, or since the start of this conference today, preparedness can only be done so much, and then you have to account it to an act of God or an act of nature or some kind of, we need to be ready for should something like this happen. And as I think it was Ulrich said, sometimes you can't even imagine what might happen next.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Kimberly, in some of the earlier talks, well, in Nikki's talk in particular, we heard about having air pumped in for the safety of rescuers, that kind of thing, and all the PPE people were wearing. But we've mentioned a couple times, but not much during this conference, about mental health support and services for the responders. Can you talk a little bit in Lahaina what was done for that? Because it laid waste to the entire community. I mean, you talked a little bit about taking vacation, but what sort of long-term support has there been?
So within us, we went back to normal as quickly as possible. But a lot of our staff, some of our board members lost family members, as well as their homes. So FEMA, actually, Federal Emergency Management for America, brought in Catholic Charities and other groups to help. Displaced, most people were displaced into hotels. So the hotels actually did full slights of entertainment and like luau's and things along those lines. What we found is that much like when you lose someone and you have to get through the wake and the funeral and all of those things, like it doesn't hit you until much later than you think. And so that really was just after the year anniversary. Everything was like, I need a place to stay. I need a car. I lost my driver's license. I lost my passport. I got things to do. We lost people. We have to celebrate their lives. So we're actually just hitting, like we're right in the first wave of serious mental concerns. And so we're still working our way through it. But one of the things is we, as a group, is getting out in nature, enjoying why we live in paradise, getting together as communities, which is a huge part of Native Hawaiian and Hawaiian residents' life. We didn't let that stop. So as quickly as possible, if you had, your 1-year child's luau, you put it off for a couple of weeks, but you went back to life as quickly as possible. So I don't have a great answer except for trying to live your life. And we're just now seeing some of the issues with suicides and other issues.
Thank you. I think one of the most important things is that you're aware of it. You were very conscious of it the entire time. And that's something I think the world has become more conscious of. There have been some resources put in the chat during the day about groups and papers and resources. It's so important. We have a few. I'm going to shift to some volunteer questions. Nikki, huge number of volunteers. How did you manage that size of volunteer response?
How did we?
2,000 people. How do you wrangle 2,000 people while dealing with a disaster?
Well, there weren't 2,000 people together all at one time. It added up to 2,000 people. I must admit, I don't remember the exact numbers, but we had 2 shifts per day. So let's start at the beginning, how we got them. Firstly, the event was being televised live. So the fire the video that I showed is my video, but at the same time, there were camera crews who came on site and the colleagues, because it was hard lockdown, we weren't allowed out of at our homes without permission. So we came onto campus because of this disaster. And the rest of the staff, our colleagues, were watching this on TV. And so the nation, and it was also broadcast internationally. And so UCT has a large alumni group, and we were just receiving offers for help to the point where we couldn't manage anymore. And we used existing systems we wrangled existing systems in order to create a space for volunteers. So there were offers to help physically, offers for expertise, because we needed paper conservators, and that is quite a rare animal in our environment, and then financial donations, because we were just being inundated. I remember sitting in the bath at about 11 p.m. I had just gotten home, got into the bath, and I was sitting there WhatsApping, responding to people with offers of various types. And so we had a volunteer database. We created one quite quickly. And then the person assigned to manage volunteers, not only they, but all of us went onto radio and television, as well as social media, and then put out calls for more volunteers, but we managed it from there. And people were asked specifically to be able to be healthy, self-declared, of course, and to be able to lift 25 kilograms, because that's the standard volume, to please come appropriately dressed. You wouldn't believe some of the people. And then everyone had to go through an induction and occupational health and safety induction session that was run by our university OHSE team. And from there onwards, they were then allowed to go on site. There were people who we had to ask them straight out, are you claustrophobic? Do you have any other concerns of this nature? It was very important for everyone's well-being, and also to be free of COVID. We didn't expect people to declare they had COVID, but we expected them to self-manage and not come on site if they had thought that they might have the virus. And so 2 shifts daily, signed up, and these people were contacted based on the information that they provided, asked to come, given the list of requirements, induction center, wear appropriate clothing, safety clothing, and so on. And then we had to manage it in terms of food and water, ablution facilities. And during that time, because it wasn't only our building that was affected, there were other buildings on the campus as well. There was a time when we ran out of water, so one half of the university didn't have water. There were no ablution facilities, and people had to walk about close to 1 kilometer to get to a loo. So that was the joy of the day-to-day volunteer management.
That's just amazing. Kimberly, I'm going to move it the similar question to you, how you dealt with volunteers during this period. Especially, I mean, there's a couple things here. You've got volunteers, but they're also dealing with their own emergencies. So how did that impact the volunteers you got? And it ties into another question we have here about a lot of speakers have talked about sort of geographical isolation before or after the disaster the it difficult to organize things, to get supplies, to do it. And of course, you're on an island. So can you talk a little bit about volunteers, how the geographical isolation might have impacted that, or also just impacted your project in general?
Yes. So ultimately, we were not allowed, and we still are not allowed to use volunteers. The area of our sites is still not available without permission. When we get a little bit further on, actually working with Scry, we found that there are safe ways to work with these toxic ashes. And ultimately, our fire burned so hot that a lot of the heavy chemicals and organics actually burned away. So it's not as toxic as we thought. So once we get to the point where everything's recovered and at our one surviving site, we actually had a program called Malama Hawaii, which was a hands-on history program where visitors to the island and locals would come together and help us digitize and basically just process artifacts from 60 years of our living as a museum and kind of Lahaina's attic. So we're going to go back to that, but with more PPE needed and more training needed. But we'll go back to that. And our tourism is just bouncing back from this disaster. All of the islands actually lost tourists because one town burned on one island. That's just a mental thing with tourism. So we're just kind of getting back from that. So I would say in about 4 or 5 months, we can actually start that program back up with actually caring for some of these surviving items. And then the second part of the question, everything has to come by barge or plane to get to us. So there is no Amazon Prime for Hawaii. And so, it's just a matter of our Hawaii Museum Association, our Western Museum Association, and state and local history are working to make us self-sufficient. So we're hoping to actually have the HEART training come here and train up some of our people. We have a Polynesian group that trains throughout the Polynesian islands. We just have to, and it's kind of what we did, like we have to get the HAZWOPER training. We have to get the collections care training. We can't send it out. Particularly due to the possible toxicity. So hopefully we're going to get better at doing it all ourselves. That's kind of our goal.
Thank you. And we have tons more questions piled up. I'm going to remind everybody, breakout rooms real soon. We're going to have a couple closing remarks from organizers, but Kimberly and Nikki will stay around to go into breakout rooms so we can get through some more of these questions and you can talk to all the speakers from today. Thank you so much. It's incredibly powerful, the whole conference, but today in particular about the kind of devastation these disasters can have and the way everyone rises up to help. It's heartening and terrifying and all of the things. Thank you very much for your presentations. I'm going to turn it over to Samantha and to Peter.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you. And we're gonna wrap up by, start wrapping up by a Slido question. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. And I believe it will be in the Slido poll as well. So in 2 or 3 words, what is your biggest lesson learned during the conference? And that's something we would really like to know.
Network creation, yes, absolutely. And make a plan now. And have a plan that's useful, practical, and accessible. Because like we saw with the example that Nikki just shared, finding that binder after the disaster has happened, I think we all have been there in various ways. So something that's really practical and be flexible about it, because you can only do the best that you can on those blue sky days for making plans, but when you're actually in it, things will be modified.
Well, a network also implies that you have a number of people that you personally know, and that you can rely on, and that you know what they will be doing. And so that is one very important thing in preparation as well, that you get to know each other and network with your colleagues. Okay, I guess we should go on now. Sam, what don't you think?
Sure. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Also, I'll share my screen again with the Slido poll over. I would just like to quickly tell you just a tiny little bit about the Leibniz Research Network Preservation, which is the where the money came from for this event here. And so the Leibniz-Association is one of the extra university associations like Max Planck and Fraunhofer and Helmholtz and so on in Germany. So we have all of those extra university ones. And within the Leibniz Association, we have 8 research museums which are focused on research. And these, along with 4 other institutes outside of the museum, of those research museums, form the Leibniz Research Network on Preservation. And we do many activities in conservation and restoration and conservation research. And that is, of course, the focus here. We also have the aim of disseminating knowledge. That is one among many other aims. And that we do that through workshops and conferences, like the one we just had. We're just closing. And we found out that, we can reach out most if we try to reduce barriers for participation, be it a registration fee, which we do not ask for, and be it just simply attending online, which makes no travel necessary. And since 2020, we've been online because we found out during the pandemic that this worked best for a huge audience. Okay, but we started in 2018 with the first international conference on preventive conservation. That was the title, and that's how we all joined. All the museums joined and got to know each other and so on. And we had a first national conference following in 2019, which was on practice and public outreach. And then in 2020, when COVID struck, we reached out to Cambridge, University of Cambridge museums. Since they had planned a plastics conference, we had planned a plastics conference prior to COVID. And then we thought, okay, let's just join forces and do it online. And that's what we did. And it was a huge success. We have the videos online here. You can see the link down below. In 2021, we had, and you may notice, we have alternating national and international conferences. We had a conference on access and preservation. And in 2022, just 2 years ago, we had, again, with Cambridge University Museums, the Facing Climate Change Conference, a huge conference, which was great. And you can, again, watch the videos down here. Right. Last year, we were struck by a cyber attack at our museum, which you can see in the design of the flyer. It's different, but we teamed up with 2 universities, one in Stuttgart, the other one in Bamberg in Germany, and it looked after the topic was to foster and to request, and that means to request money, if you wish. But see all the funding agencies on the right hand side here, and this brings us to our current conference, Disaster Risk Management for Cultural Heritage. And we were overwhelmed by the number of participants. And maybe, Sam, you want to continue, and I'll just keep on clicking here.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, we were so thankful to see that so many people were interested and wanted to get involved in discussions and learn more about disaster risk management for cultural heritage. 107 countries are represented. And if you want to click again, Peter, to show our map, this is phenomenal. You can see the entire world on this map. And just to note that this is number of registrations per country in relationship to the maximum number, which was from the United States, 362. So that equals 100% of registrations in a country. So we're so fortunate that we have people that are interested, want to be involved, and want to share this information with their colleagues. We are overwhelmed. This is the first time I've been involved in it, and it was an excellent opportunity to get to know more colleagues through our working group, through our planning committee, but also with all of you being here and having our discussions in the breakout rooms throughout the week was a great opportunity. And we can move on. And these are just some of the different screenshots from the Slido polls that we've done since the beginning. And the first one was where people were joining us from that day. We were fortunate that overall, I think that the highest we had on one day was about 380 people, and it's fluctuated. People are coming and going depending upon what time of day it is, wherever they are. But it's been great to see, and we'll do a full review at the end of how many overall attendees we actually had. And this is another snapshot of representing the different country, I'm losing the word, Peter.
The continents.
That's it.
The different continents.
Represented. Which again is phenomenal to see the wide variety of folks that are represented here. And the types of organizations. We were expecting museums, archives, libraries, but students, it was great to see that we had students and people that are newer to the field being part of this. Herbaria, they're all over the place. Thank you for coming and representing here.
And speaking of students, and that is one thing we learned in our first conference, which again was free, but in person, a lot of students from the local university where conservation was taught attended that conference. And so we wanted to lower those barriers to attend, and that worked here too.
And then we were curious, this was another Slido poll of, how large are the organizations that we're representing here? And it's pretty even across the board, from 1 to 50 people to more than 500 people, which is great because there is a wide variety out there.
And it shows that also the smaller institutions can participate in this event here.
Yes. And this is important, and flood and fire are the biggest ones on here, but there are so many others that we need to consider. And, water is, I think, our biggest enemy in so many different places, because any event that happens, whether there's an earthquake, a fire, or other natural disasters, water is going to be involved at some part during the recovery effort and as part of the disaster.
So the question on emergency networks was modified from what you saw yesterday, or the day before yesterday, because the no did not show. We managed to get it on here, but fortunately it is not that large. Yes is much larger, and then split up into the different categories as to federal, national, regional, and so on. So many of you are part of an emergency network, which is great, which may help in case of disaster.
And this is a challenge all the time. We all have a lot of responsibilities that pull us in many different directions, but just to find out if you do have a dedicated staff member, and where are they located within your organization. So that was encouraging to see that, yes, there are dedicated staff at many places, unfortunately not everywhere, but hopefully, whatever you can bring back to your organization from this conference can help raise awareness of the importance of having dedicated staff and having people that are trained related to disaster risk management for cultural heritage will help your organization get on board and get people that are dedicated and trained.
Well, and again, it's good to see that no is much smaller than yes. And so happy to see that again. I'm afraid I can't read the top line here. So Sam, could please go ahead.
So this one was who in your organization would be interested in additional training, and conservation are the folks that are most interested in the additional training, but it's pretty even across the board that there are many, many different roles that we all fill as collection stewards, and we all need training. And I like that everyone is on there, and many people put everyone as their answer because that is the truth.
Yeah, that's what we heard today as well. So yes, so thank you very much for that.
And what are the key actions? What actions are key for your organization's preparedness? Training, yes, is absolutely the biggest one. And emergency networks, emergency plans, communication, and that's key. And we heard about that throughout all of the presentations about the importance of communication and collaboration and practice.
And staff time, that is one thing that has to be set aside, even though there are other pressing issues on your mind. So you have to have your administration get you there, that you can allocate time for your staff to actually spend in both in training and in preparing.
What challenges does your organization face when implementing risk management systems? And it's not a big surprise to see that funding is the biggest one that was given as an answer.
Yeah, but still, again, staff resources is one other big thing, and training. And so these are the topics that we revolve around. And so, yes, we need to look into that. And with that, we would like to end the review of the Slido questions, Slido polls of the first 3 days. We do not have the current ones at hand right now, but we would like to ask you again, since you've seen this conference and since you have seen what we have done in the past, you might want to tell us what you would like to see us do in the future. And so the Slido poll that is now open ask you, what topic would you like to see for the next conference? Sustainability. That's a big topic, yes.
Yes. And maybe think about what are you talking about with your colleagues where you are, or things that you wish that you could learn more about that you just haven't had access to, or that you've heard about that are in conversations that you have internally, but that you think that others would benefit from, that topic as well. Decolonization, okay, yes.
Decolonization. There are many other networks and collaboration and decolonization. Yeah, those are coming up. But sustainability seems to be the one that is still most, it is getting on par. Here we go.
Thank you all so much for all the answers that you've given us through the polls throughout the week and the questions that you've submitted through the Slido as well. And as you're finishing up, I just want to say a quick, huge thank you to Prince Media, who is working behind the scenes on Slido, on all these slides, on running the tech for Zoom, making sure that our speaker slides were ready to go in case they needed backup. But they've been incredible to work with, and we thank you very much for your support.
And we would like to come everybody up of the organizing team in a moment. Maybe you can unshare your screen for letting me share the screen again. There we go. Okay, and we would also, besides Prince Media, who we do hope that they will put on the camera, we would also like to thank you very much for your attention to stay with us for those 4 days at all your different time zones. So maybe getting up very early in the morning or staying up late. And we would also like to thank all presenters and moderators and everybody on the team. And that does include those persons who cannot be with us at this moment. Maybe we can highlight the team now. So there's Tatjana Kessler from Deutsches Museum. Dawn, yeah, we just heard you all day, which was great. And Nora Schlag, she is coordinating the network. Thank you very much. And Anna Kaufer and Leonard Mendelssohn. Both of you were very active behind the scenes. Leonard, great thank you for having all the speakers' audio and video checked. Thank you very much. And I believe that's it for now. Is it, Sam?
Yes, I think we're all set and ready for breakout rooms.
Yes, and we will say goodbye for now and hope to see you maybe in 2 years when it is again an international conference. Thank you very much for staying with us so long. And I will now speak the last words since everybody is leaving. Not many people are left. And so thank you so much for being here, and all the best. See you in 2 years.